Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending online. Thank you for those who are joining on site. I'm very, very happy and honored to present to you today Ms. Sanae Akodad. She holds a master's degree in biomedical sciences and has a specialization in neurosciences. She's with us already for a number of years, and she will be actually very soon, we hope, the second I3h PhD student who graduates. So I'm very, very pleased that today you get, as an attendee of our I3h seminars, a sneak peek into all the work Sanae has accomplished over the past years. Thank you so much, Sanae, for presenting your work to us.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Hilde. Yeah, indeed. So over the past 5 years, I had the privilege to work under your supervision. And I'd like to sincerely thank you for your guidance, your trust, and actually for allowing this research to grow across disciplines that rarely speak to each other. And this is actually the main purpose of I3h. So today I will deliver the key insights and findings from my doctoral research on the burden of rare disease with a focus on SMA. But my work does not study spinal muscular atrophy only as a disease. I would say that it studies SMA as a stress test, because when a breakthrough therapy arrives, like it was the case with SMA and Zolgensma, it does not only challenge biology, it challenges regulation, it challenges budget, it challenges evidence framework, and it challenges what patients and their families actually experience. And very early in my PhD, one question became unavoidable. Why is medical innovation not enough to change a patient's life? And these questions actually forced me, as someone trained as a biomedical scientist, you mentioned it, Hilde, to move far beyond molecules. It forced me to look at systems, decisions, and lived realities. And actually to anchor all this complexity, I turned to a story that many of you here will remember, the case of Pia. Well, in Belgium, the case of Pia became a national moment. A newborn diagnosed quite early with SMA type 1 at a time when a transformative therapy existed and was available in the US, but Pia had no access to it. This case reveals something essential. When an innovation arrives faster than institutional procedures, every weaknesses become visible at once. And SMA makes these weaknesses impossible to ignore. Access delays, reimbursement bottlenecks, eligibility tensions, economic distortions, ethical dilemmas about who receives the treatment and when, and beyond immediate survival, questions about long-term development, quality of life. And in my PhD, well, I would say that Pia is not the centerpiece, she is the narrative anchor, a real human reference point that help us understand why innovation in rare disease cannot be studied from a single angle. And today I'd like to take you through the 4 dimensions that emerge from this multidimensional work, 4 ways at looking at the same disease, each revealing a different weakness in the system and a different opportunity for change, to see it in a more optimistic way. First, access. So why do patients in different countries reach the same innovation at radically different times? Second, the burden. When treatments finally reach the patient, transform survival, how those treatments reshape the economic burdens for families, caregivers, but the health system as a whole, indeed. And third, I would say new pathways. So in rare disease, traditional market incentives often fail. So how do we design alternative pathways to stimulate orphan drug development when commercial drivers are that weak for such a field? And finally, the life after treatment, because survival is not the endpoint. So we need to understand how those kind of treatments reshape development, reshapes cognition, I will say a word about it, and quality of life. So together, these 4 pillars form a single question. How do we redesign rare disease innovation so that it's not only life-saving, but life-shaping. So let's begin with the first dimension, access, accessing innovation. Why the same therapy reaches patients at different speeds, depending on where they live? Well, to answer this, we worked on 4 complementary articles, each focusing on a different layer of the access architecture. So in the first article, we have co-written with Professor Goldman and Professor Stevens. The article maps early access pathways across the US, Europe, China, and Japan. Why China and Japan? 2 emerging countries becoming quite leaders in the field. Articles 2, there, within a cooperation with PharmaDB, we decided to zoom in on the US-EU divide and zoom in again on the disparities between Europe member states. We quantify launch sequencing, trial geography, early access programs, sponsors' behavior, etc. In a third collaboration within the I3h project with Paris School of Economics, with Lise Rochet and Baptiste Aon, we examined early and accelerated access program for medical devices in the European Union. And as a fourth contribution, we identified a structural regulatory and access gap for orphan medical devices in both Europe and in the US. So let's move to the first group of findings. Let me summarize the main insights before we move to the detailed numbers. So as a first assumption, a first insight, I would say, same science, different access. Indeed, all regulators look at the same clinical evidence, yet timelines differ dramatically. This tells us that access is shaped less by data quality than by the system interpreting. Second, regulatory culture diverge. Indeed, in the US, you have the FDA that says basically, okay, we don't know everything, but the benefit seems there. So they prioritize speed and flexibility. Basically, they are very regulatory flexibility driven, I would say. The EMA is more consensus driven, procedural, risk averse, because they need to get a political and a scientific consensus. Then you have the Japan. Japan relies on a structured early dialogue. So when they submit a dossier, they have already discussed with companies. Their dossier is quite improved already by the discussion they had as early dialogue. Then you have China becoming a leader in the field. Well, they were, I would say, suffering from a true drug lag, if I can say it like this. And through big reforms, CFDA become the ENPA, and through those big reforms, they really accelerated and now are becoming leaders. So these cultures influence how uncertainty is handled, and therefore how fast patients receive treatment. Third, I would say that disparities begin before submission. Why? Well, because companies file first where the process is predictable and fast, because the FDA offers a clearer and faster pathway. It attracts early submissions, which automatically delays Europe. Then I would say that approval speeds are not aligned. Even once a dossier is submitted, the FDA completes the review in months ahead of the AMA. We will show that in numbers. Fifth, the biggest inequity comes after the approval. So in the US, access follows within months, basically. When in Europe, the fragmentation of national reimbursement, the sovereignty of each country, created a second layer of delay. And this is where actually the gap widens the most. So I would say, basically, to sum up everything, access is not a scientific outcome. It is the result of policy decisions. The evidence is global, okay? But the decision-making structures are national or regional, and the mismatch creates the inequities we observe worldwide. And I can now show you a few numbers that...
Can I?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It looks like the US is faster and does better. frankly, the US is a disaster of benefits because people pay so much.
Yeah, indeed.
This will come in your story.
We are talking about costs later, but now if we look only at approvals and how sponsors choose to land a trial somewhere,
The
etc.
companies go first for the high price countries.
Sorry?
Companies go first for high price countries. So
Yeah.
and they play countries against.
Yeah, this is definitely part of the equation, yeah.
So
But if we focus on the access, it's a problem, you might say. That we prioritize the US.
Many people in Wales won't have children.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
But okay, just
But in terms of access, it's a pity that we prioritize US, despite the fact that indeed, pricing are another part of the problem. Yeah. Yes.
So may I ask you, you might have access to innovative therapy in the context of clinical trials.
Yeah, indeed.
So, and actually that's often, the easiest way also to get the drug for free.
Yeah.
Obviously, if it's in the context of a randomized trial, you are not sure that you will get it, but still. And another source of disparity is the fact that, most clinical trials, or at least the majority of trials, are done in the US, much less in Europe. There are still trials in Europe, fortunately. But I think that this should be, in a way, integrated also in the causes of disparity.
Yeah. Actually, this is a part of what we are going to show here in the number. The fact that the trial geography is a part of the problem. And we mentioned the US, but China is now the leader in trials. Yeah. So indeed, I will mention part of what we just discussed in the presentation. So first, I would discuss the review times. On average, the FDA completes review in about 8 to 9 months. And the EMA takes roughly 14 to 15 months. So this already, at this stage of the process, creates a 4 to 6 months delay for Europe, even before reimbursement. We mentioned the fact that reimbursement creates a wide gap. Second, the use of accelerated pathways. Well, in the US, roughly 3/4 of new medicines benefit from expedited programs, and almost all orphan drugs do, 90%. In Europe, fewer than half do. This uneven use of acceleration translates directly into uneven speed of access. Then you have the launch sequencing. Nearly 3/4 of oncology, I picked that field because it's very speaking, of oncology drugs are launched first in the US, while less than a quarter launch first in Europe. So sponsors clearly prioritize the fastest and most predictable system, as we mentioned. Then you have, like you said, Professor Goldman, the clinical trial geography. China and the US now host the majority of global trials. So indeed, the access is potentially available for patients there through that way. Europe's share has fallen sharply over the past decades, as you can see, from 22% to 12%. So where trials take place, strongly influence where companies file first. And finally, what happens after approval? We mentioned it. So in the US, patients usually access treatments within a few months when they can afford it. In Europe, national fragmentation, sovereignty, etc., adds more than a year on average. We will see that with a concrete case study with Zolgensma, and sometimes much more. So this post-approval phase is where the access gap widens the most. So far, we have focused on medicines. When we look at orphan medical devices, access becomes even more uneven. First, there is no orphan status and no incentives in Europe. Unlike drugs, orphan devices do not benefit from a legally, and I insist on that word, a legally binding orphan designation or economic incentives. One can argue that we have the MDCG 2024, where these guidelines only provide definitions, principles that stakeholders and regulatory bodies can follow or invited to follow. but there is no legal dimension, no economic incentives in there. So by the contrast, the US has recognized orphan devices since 1990 through the HUD-HDE pathway. Second, well, high-risk rare disease device lack any dedicated, accelerated, or conditional approval pathway. So even when a device is high risk or life-sustaining, there is no equivalent to accelerated approval. We have in the MDR some articles like the Article 59, the Article 5.5, which allow for an acceleration case by case nationally, but this is not an accelerated program per se. Third, the assessment under the MDR is completely fragmented. Indeed, it's not like with the AMA, a central regulatory bodies. With the MDR, you rely on notified bodies rather than the single centralized authority. And the expertise of those notified bodies and capacity, well, vary. They are scattered all over Europe, private. So you can, and it's worse actually with orphan medical devices, you can count on big delays because the expertise needed is high. Fourth, there is an evidence asymmetry compared to drugs. So regulators apply stringent evidence standards, but without adapted pathways for small population. Basically, the MDR was launched after the health scandal of the PIP breast implant, exactly, because we wanted to secure European citizens with devices. So they really need very high evidence, but with orphan population, you have very small populations scattered all over Europe. So the asymmetry is becoming higher. So taken together, this leads to a clear conclusion. For orphan medical devices, access barriers are structural, not scientific.
I think that it would be, I'm sorry, Sanae, but I think that for the audience here, I think it's important that you explain what a medical device is and how it is different from the classical drugs.
Yeah, of course. So a medical device, basically, it's formed with pieces. It's a technology that will help the patient. Well, it's not comparable to a drug because it assists the patient with the technology. It can be life assisting, like a heart transplant or things like that. For SMA, for example, we can discuss the eye tracking device. So those are tools that are used by patients to help condition their life, enhance their quality of life, and make I would say their life livable, if I may say. It does not replace the drug per se, but
But the first example that everybody knows, of course, is a cardiac pacemaker.
Exactly. Yeah. So indeed. Yes. So we discussed access, and I will now focus on as mentioned, on a single case and come back to Pia's case with Zolgensma. So this part of my research is grounded in 2 articles that analyze Zolgensma not only as a therapy, but I would say as a catalyst, something that forced national and transnational systems to reveal how they actually function under pressure. The first article examined how Belgium's national early access framework responded when confronted with one-shot gene therapy. I will explain. The second article shifts the lens of the regional cooperation because we had a real proof of concept with Beneluxa. So together, these 2 articles trace the full governance arc of Zolgensma, from national bottlenecks to regional coordination. Zolgensma is a useful case study because it puts health system under a type of pressure they were not designed to handle. As mentioned, it's a one-shot gene therapy given very early in life with strict condition, with potentially life-changing effects.
So when such a therapy arrives, well, it raises more than clinical questions. It tests whether our access rules, procedures, and coordination mechanisms are actually fit to purpose. The first problems appears at the level of legal architecture.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but again, for the audience, I think that it would be good that you explain in few words what SMA is.
Okay.
And what the gene therapy, why the gene therapy is so important.
Of course. So SMA is a neuromuscular disease, a rare disease, the first pediatric rare disease. And actually, Zolgensma is the second treatment that appeared for that disease. It's a gene therapy, a one-shot gene therapy that creates the protein which is lacking in the disease. So it produced the protein that, well, patients without SMN2, in fact, are lacking to produce, and it replaced the gene missing, basically. So Zolgensma came as a revolution in that field, and I would say that, as mentioned, the first problem with Zolgensma when it arrives is that most early access frameworks were actually built for chronic treatments, because there is another treatment for SMA, it's Spinraza. Spinraza is a chronic treatment, intrathecal. The kids need to take it each 4 months, so very heavy, the burden is high. And with Zolgensma, you have a one-shot therapy. But the legal architecture that welcomed Spinraza was not fit for Zolgensma.
What is Spinraza?
So I just mentioned it. Spinraza is a chronic treatment.
No. What is it? Is it a drug? Is it?
It's a drug that you administrate intrathecally to the kids. And same again, you are boosting the production of the protein through the other genes, so not SMN1, SMN2.
But it also targets the gene, right?
Yeah, in a way, but in another biological pathway.
Because before those two drugs, those kids had no available treatment.
No,
that's
indeed.
important. So it was really a revolution.
Indeed, yes. And actually, the fact that this chronic treatment was existing, well, everything was difficult to welcome Zolgensma in that legal framework that existed for the chronic treatments. So the second issue comes actually from outside the formal system. So as mentioned, Pia, she had no access to Zolgensma back then. So the parents need to launch a crowdfunding campaign. But Pia's crowdfunding did not emerge because the science was uncertain. We had proof from the US that it was working. It emerged because administrative procedures could not respond at the same speed as clinical urgency. And in this case,
and paid a huge price.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, of course. But indeed. And the visibility created momentum when governance could not. And the price is definitely part of the problem, because the uncertainty, the risk was not easy to take for the government. The price was super high back then. I mean, it's still the case. And at the same time, well, the system kind of adapts because of the pressure of the population, in part, through Beneluxa. So Belgium, the Netherlands, and Ireland choose to negotiate together. This coordination allows those small countries to pool their expertise and strengthen their negotiation position through a joint HTA and then joint price negotiation, etc. But coordination was not a full solution, unfortunately. Even within this flagship collaboration, I would say that decision criteria remained quite opaque. Eligibility was extremely narrow, I can explain. So to get access to Zolgensma, you need to be under 2 years of age, and you need to have less than 3 copies of the gene SMN2, which is quite narrow, I would say. And another problem is that patient organizations were not structurally integrated. And it's a pity when you see that in the whole process, they push to create a sort of a small snowball effect to get access to the drug. So when we step back, I would say that I wouldn't say that Zolgensma breaks the system because it was too expensive. It's of course part of the problem, but it stressed the system because it didn't fit the rules it was designed for. Basically, the fact that Spinraza was already there created many problems. And I will explain. Indeed, if we look at the timeline, the regulatory timelines for Zolgensma, it was approved by the US in 2019. And then we had an EMM through the CHMP by the EMA in May 2020, so 1 year later. It's quite a long time for a time-critical therapy, some would say. And in Belgium, well, the reimbursement followed only 500 days after, in December 2021, through the Benelux price negotiations. So this means that more than 500 days elapsed between the European approval and national access. And I would say that Zolgensma is not an outlier. It closely reflects the average delay observed in Belgium for orphan drugs. That's what we observed in our data. So the next question is whether patients could access the therapy earlier. Well, this is interesting to see that in this timeline, in 2019 already, several early access routes were explored. An Article 111, so it's a law in the Belgium legal framework that allows for, I would say, specific case-by-case emergency use of a drug that is not reimbursed yet. But the problem with the Article 111 is that we already had Spinraza in the markets. And if you have an already reimbursed alternative, you cannot benefit from that article. Now, a discussion can be open on value equivalence, I would say, between Spinraza and Zolgensma. But since that drug existed, it was difficult to use that article. Then you had a managed access program proposed by Novartis. And here again, well, it was rejected by Belgium on the basis that actually the risk was too high. We didn't know anything about the drug, and the price tag being that high, the risk wasn't taken by our authorities. So none of these routes resulted in access before reimbursement, because in practice, early access frameworks were simply not designed for a one-time, time-critical gene therapy. So at that point, the process moved beyond the national level, as mentioned, and we had the coalition of those different countries under the Benelux coalition that led to the price negotiation and finally the reimbursement of the drug in December 2021 in our country. So what this case basically shows is not a failure of the therapy itself, but a system adapting step by step across levels to an innovation it was not built for. Well, and it's interesting is that across Europe, countries have increasingly tried to work together to strengthen negotiation power and reduce inequalities. And through our analysis, I was speaking about the article we have been working on, we identified 12 regional collaboration that emerged between 2012 and 2019. So those initiatives did not develop, I would say, randomly. They cluster into 4 main regional groups. So you have the Nordic countries, you have the Baltic countries, you have the Western Europe with the Benelux notably, and you have the Southern and Central Eastern European cluster. And together, these collaborations form a patchwork of coordination efforts. Countries that try to align on elements such as pricing approaches, eligibility criteria, or evidence requirement, while, and this is important, keeping final decision at the national level. One initiative stands out. This is the small square you can see, the I3h, I would pronounce it like this, so the International Horizon Scanning Initiative. It has been created in 2019, and it brings together 9 members, and basically what they do, they produce horizon scanning reports, quite early, very early procedural reports, through those 9 member states that are part of this confederation. And the policy intelligence that they produce is used by 44 countries through the PPRI, so the pricing and reimbursement information network that is coordinated by WHO. And this makes I3h the Europe's most advanced attempt to anticipate high impact therapies before they reach the markets. Well, the largest pharmaceutical markets in Europe, like France, Germany, and the UK, unfortunately do not participate in such alliances. They have big HTAs, big markets, and their absence actually limits the bargaining power of coalitions and constrains broader European alignment. As another limitation, I would say that most collaboration rely on the soft governance. They are based on non-binding memoranda of understanding, so no legal obligation. We are calling it the coalitions of the willing in the literature. So it's based on willingness, no legal obligation, and as a result, joint procurement or joint reimbursement remains very difficult to implement at scale. We have an example with the Baltics countries that successfully get vaccines, pneumococcal vaccines, rotavirus vaccines through joint procurement, but because it was a very small area through Europe. And when you consider larger areas, it's of course more difficult. So yeah. So this was an example of how we could align our forces. Yes?
There was, of course, but not for rare disease, for COVID vaccine, there was a joint procurement.
At the level of Europe, yeah.
Which we mentioned in our joint paper.
Yeah, indeed.
So wouldn't you think it would be better to just go for that for rare disease in general?
Well, the principle with COVID was that it was unique. If you do that for every orphan drugs, it will create something that kills sovereignty of each countries. And
Europe is about killing sovereignty on many.
Yes,
if it's win-win, why not? I mean, it's not necessarily win-win for the other side, the companies, but
But for the COVID, the win-win, I would say, template was obvious for each country. For orphan drugs, there is some pedagogy to produce to convey each of those national countries to.
The problem is that it will reduce the prices for sure, because it will be better for the negotiation with the pharma. But still, sorry?
That's the point.
That's the point, but the price might still be unaffordable for the less rich countries.
So that's why in our joint paper we say that we may want to look at Frankfurt and all this.
Yeah, but that's an important element of the equation, because it means that the European Union has also to support some countries to afford the prices, otherwise it will not work.
Yeah, and this heterogeneity can be a stop. Yeah, indeed.
But the idea of the structural funds is an excellent idea, because I think that in some countries they are not used right.
Yeah, indeed.
Anyway, thank you. This is interesting about this.
Yeah, we mapped
data.
it. Yeah, it was. I think it was necessary to see it concretely. Yeah, so we did that. Yeah, and actually, this brings us to the second dimension of my work. So now, if innovative therapies arrive, I would say unevenly yes, but when it arrives, what happens once they do? How do they reshape the economic burdens for families, health system, and society? And to answer this, well, the first chapter of my work develops a global mapping of SMA's economic burden, drawing on cross-country evidence and on a Belgium, I would say, first national SMA dataset. I will explain the methodology. And this chapter is built around 3 articles. First, a comparative global review, which synthesizes evidence across different countries' health system. The second focuses on Belgium. We are using patient-reported data hosted on a website we created. So it's hosting questionnaires that we have put online to reach the families of patients more easily. And third, well, a budget impact analysis for Belgium in the perspective of the payers in AMI. It models the financial implication of adopting Zolgensma in a newborn screening context. I will explain. So when we look at the burden of SMA across countries, the same pattern emerge again and again. First key message, well, SMA is costly even before treatments enters the pictures. Indeed, costs start early and extend far beyond medical care. Transport, home adaptation, equipment, and care coordination. And this care pattern are also imply a negligible environmental footprint. We are more and more talking about environmental costs driven by those repeated hospital visits, energy-intensive home adaptations. Well, as a second message, I would say that informal care is the dominant hidden costs, so all those indirect costs we will develop. This makes informal care the largest and most invisible cost driver. Then you have the quality of life, which remains severely impaired. We will show that through numbers. And as a crucial insight, I would say that cross-country comparison show that difference in cost and quality of life depends not only on the disease biology, but on the health system organization. Countries with stronger social support structures report lower out-of-pocket payments and better quality of life outcomes. So it's interesting to take a look at that. And finally, I would say that the Belgian data confirm all those patterns. So what we did is, as mentioned, create a website hosting questionnaires, assessing the direct cost, indirect cost, quality of life of the patients, but also the quality of life of their caregivers. And the message is clear from the small power of our study. It's not descriptive, it's not statistically inferent, but it's I would say a descriptive validation of what has been said elsewhere. SMA is no longer a terminal condition, but a chronic one, and our systems must adapt accordingly. So let's move to some insights and numbers from our analysis. So with the direct costs first, the most visible part of the economic burden are those direct costs. We can say that across countries, annual medical costs for SMA type 1 typically range between 40,000 to 130,000 euros. But medical care is only part of the story. Huh? Non-medical recurring costs, those that we are not including in cost evaluation, and I think it's a pity. So the transports, the devices, the home adaptation, they add another 22,000, to 40,000 euro per year. And across all countries with full data,
these items consistently represent about 25 to 40% of total burden in all countries. The pity is that those costs are often being overlooked in cost evaluation. Belgian data are actually showing the same pattern. In Belgium, total annual direct costs reach about 94,000 euros when equipment is included. Then you have the medical costs excluding, the direct medical costs that exclude treatment, so around 2,000 euros per year. And on top of that, you have what the families face as one-off expenses, so mobility aids, home adaptation, ranging from 1,600 euros up to 32,000 euros. It depends actually on the needs. As mentioned, our study is based on a very low power, few responders, unfortunately. And we have another study that has launched since then, led by Tamara Denguloff, and she has the possibility to reach the patient more directly and to ask those questions we are asking online directly to the patients. And she included some Belgian participants, so we can definitely say a word about what she had produced. Well, we can see a clear gradient from SMA types. When you have the most severe case, you I would say wear a burden of 40,000 euros per year. For type 2, around 30,000 per year, and SMA type 3, 15,000 per year, which is interestingly linked, as mentioned, to the severity of the illness. And in all cases, non-medical costs account for roughly, I would say, 30% of the burden. So the key message is that even before treatments, those very high, very expensive treatments enter the picture, well, SMA generates a substantial financial burden.
Sanae.
Oui, yes.
Just a question regarding reimbursements.
Sorry?
Just a question regarding reimbursements.
Yeah.
This is 6 out of 7 households receives reimbursement.
Yeah.
Do we have an idea of the share of the cost that is reimbursed?
It's quite high. I don't know exactly the percentage, but for what they explain in their answers, it might approach the total reimbursement of those adaptations and stuff. Yeah.
I suppose for the medical costs and not the.
Even equipment adaptations. Yeah.
Okay.
It works under sort of insurance and stuff, and yeah, the coverage was quite high from what I remember.
So here when we talk about costs, you don't necessarily talk about them in terms of the burden on households, but just the cost overall.
Yeah.
Even if it's reimbursed, it costs something.
It costs something for the society.
Yeah.
And then you have those indirect costs, because as mentioned, the direct costs only tell part of the story. A major share of the burden comes from those indirect costs. And internationally, through our findings, we found that caregivers provide between 6.8 to around 13 hours of unpaid care per day. This translates, of course, into major productivity losses that are often underestimated, because here again, indirect costs are not integrated in cost evaluations. And in Belgium, well, our data kind of mirror this pattern. Families report around 41 hours of informal care per week, and 4 out of the 7 families responders are no longer working, more than a half. And when we try to monetize this productivity loss range with an average of about 16,000 euro per year. And by comparison, another study that included Belgian families reported that losses typically fall between 6,000 to 8,000 euro per year, so consistent with international studies. So across context, informal care is a dominant hidden cost driver. Then you have the quality of life. Quality of life is, of course, important to understand because it tells us how children actually live with the disease, not just how they survive. So the numbers you see are utility scores. One is actually state close to full well-being, and 0, well, equivalent to death. And across countries, you have untreated SMA type 1 often scores below, of course, 0.2. This means that children face very severe limitation in mobility, breathing, and basic functioning. In Belgium, our data, so we use the EQ5D, 5-dimension for young children. Children that are treated very early, suffering from the type 1, we have kind of a good score, I would say, comparing to those cross-countries values we have obtained. But in our sample, the kids who was answering suffering from the type 2, he seems to be very impacted with the score lower than type 1, which is counterintuitive. And for the type 4, where, well, we have something close to 1. Those results are quite consistent with the study of Tamara Dengulov because she actually used multiple tests to evaluate the quality of life, notably the HUY3, so the Health Utilities Index Mark III. This is a very good test for SMA because it assesses vision, speech, ambulation, and for neuromuscular disease, it's historically the best test to use, and you can see that the score is close to 0.2. In our website, we decided to also assess the quality of life of caregivers. It's not very the guideline of I3h, but we consider that to assess the real world burden, we needed to know more about the quality of life of those who are taking care of the patients. And we used for that the WHO questionnaires to assess quality of life. Well, they report good access to healthcare and strong perception of independence. But when we look at overall quality of life, the picture becomes more complex. You can see that the sleep quality is quite low, but as a parent, my sleep quality is also low. Leisure opportunities, they are very limited. Daily routines are shaped by continuous care demand. But what is interesting when I looked at the data is I remembered a concept well described in the literature, the proxy bias. Basically, what it is, it's when you have a parent that need to report on the quality of life of their kids, they will automatically overestimate it because they want their kids to be good. And about their own quality of life, they will also overestimate it because they have this sort of a moral obligation to feel good. So yeah, it's something that has been documented, and I think that there is something there that we can approach. Then we wanted to evaluate concretely the impact of Zolgensma on our health systems. So what we did is a budget impact analysis. So Belgium, let me give you the key insight of our study here. The big picture is actually reassuring, I would say. Belgium now screens SMA at birth nationwide. So this means there is no backlog of untreated children. Very important for a time-critical therapy to have such a screening. And each year we have a very small and predictable number of infants identified, roughly around 10. From a budget perspective, this makes planning stable and foreseeable. Second, what we can say is that Zolgensma fundamentally changed the spending profile. Instead of spending cost over a lifetime, like it's the case with Spinraza, the other treatment, or Risdiplam, it concentrates almost all expenditure in the first year. So it's a major upfront shock. But once that year has passed, we can see that the cost largely stabilized. When with Spinraza, well, it's quite the opposite logic. Lower entry costs, but permanent yearly spending, and the cohort are accumulating, so the spending as well. So even if Zolgensma is very expensive at the start, it prevents long-term cost accumulation. However, there is something very important that we have discovered through discussion with physicians, real-world data. Well, some children who receive Zolgensma within the first 2 years of their lifetime later start Spinraza, the chronic treatment. So that's what we have called sequential use. This was not actually anticipated in early economic models, and it clearly affects long-term budget projection because you are adding a new layer of spendings. So finally, what really drives the budget is not the disease incidence, which is very manageable with the SMA newborn screening program. And because SMA is quite rare, we can, of course, predict this. The true levers are then controllable. We analyzed through sensibility analysis what can be the levers. And this is definitely the price, obviously, and the uptake. So this is where policy choices matter. So the conclusion is not that Zolgensma is unsustainable, because we are facing a rare disease here. It's that sustainability depends on monitoring that sequential therapy we have discussed, and I will say more about this because that was actually something very important we have found out. And using appropriate pricing tools such as outcome-based agreements, multi-year payment models can help sustain the payment. Yes, yeah, of course.
I think it's interesting in it. I guess the selling point of Zolgensma was once and that's it.
Exactly.
So now it's once and that's not it. So at some point you have to restart the other thing. So they should reimburse. They should reimburse part of the money they got.
Based on the agreements, like
They will.
they should.
But
I don't have information about.
the contract.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite opaque, but based on the agreements between the manufacturer and the payer, indeed, if those cases are becoming, because we don't have any proof yet, it's by discussing with physicians that we have been aware of this sequential use. But if we are having more and more proofs of that use, definitely reimbursement is on the table, no?
Reimbursement of the reimbursement.
Exactly. Exactly. But for the payer, it's, yeah. Well, those are a few numbers. I don't know if we have time to go through them. Yeah, okay. So, well, this is the numbers behind what I just explained conceptually. So we start with the population. So as mentioned in SMA, the incidence corresponds to about 12 newborns per year, with roughly 10 infants eligible for Zolgensma under criteria I mentioned earlier. So under 2 years of age and a maximum 3 copies of the gene SMN2. So it creates a small cohort, and it's the basis of the entire budget model we projected. The central panel show how costs evolve over time when Zolgensma is introduced compared with the 100% Spinraza scenario. So in the first year, the incremental cost is highest, of course, as we mentioned, of upfront shock, and then it's stabilized. In subsequent years, the difference steadily decrease, reaching at the end of our projection, we use the 5 years projection, around 1.8 million euros. Well, this pattern directly reflects the different cost structures of the two treatments, Zolgensma generate a one-time expenditure at treatment initiation, while Spinraza generates recurring annual costs that accumulate cohort after cohort. The cost contrast panel illustrates this at the individual level. Zolgensma concentrates nearly the entire cost in 1 year, where Spinraza spread cost over time with substantial maintenance expenses in each subsequent year. And finally, when costs are aggregated over 5 years, so the total 5-year budget impact, well, we can see that the total expenditure reached approximately 78.3 million euros for the scenario with Zolgensma, with a 60% uptake. The rest is for Spinraza, compared to a 53 million euro projection with only Spinraza. So the incremental cost is about 25.1 million euros. I would say that this is something that is manageable for a national budget if we only count on Zolgensma in the future. So,
Sanae, this is only true if indeed one injection is enough.
Exactly, that's the problem, and that's why we have assessed through all those sensibility scenarios what would be the case with the sequential use, and I can show you here that the sequential use adds 6.36 million on top of the base case, which is not something we can just underestimate. So yeah, indeed. And well, what I can also say is that this assumption of the sequential therapy is based on clinician testimony, early follow-up registries. So in some children, as mentioned, the motor improvement kind of plateaus, and Spinraza is then introduced as a second-line therapy. It would be interesting to see if it's the case for Pia. I know that she used it before Zolgensma, but now does she use it? I know that she went under surgeries and stuff, but I don't know if she's using Spinraza. Yeah.
When you say some children, do you have an idea of the percentage? No, this percentage might decrease.
Yeah, definitely.
Over the years, then, because
this is definitely something we need to I would say, investigate more, because it's definitely a testimony from all the clinicians we have discussed with, but we don't have complete numbers yet. Yeah.
This completely changed
the whole picture, exactly. And as mentioned, we have modelized it, and it adds substantial cost.
Did you check whether there are already publications on this?
Yeah, we have checked. Nothing yet. Just testimonies through the press. I would say the normal press, saying
nothing in the literature.
For now, nothing. No. So this is interesting to say that actually gene therapy should no longer be modeled as, I would say, strictly one and done once real-world use is considered. What this also tells us is that real-world evidence matters. This highlights the importance of the PROMs, the PRAMs, the real-world evidence, and this is not only for clinical evaluation, but also, and you mentioned it, Professor Douat-Ripon, for pricing, reimbursement, and this creates indeed an interesting precedent for initiatives like Beneluxa. So if you have that in mind, and you have to negotiate for the next big gene therapy, you can indeed argue that we have some precedent. Okay, well, in the next section, I bring together two complementary articles that try to make our economic assessment of rare disease treatment a bit more, I would say, fair and a bit more complete. I will explain. So the first article looks at indirect medical costs. So basically, when a therapy like Zolgensma extends survival, well, children live long enough to consume healthcare and social services for many more years than it was expected to be the case without the treatments. And those costs are called the indirect medical costs. And if we basically ignore those costs, we make life-extending treatments look cheaper than they really are. So we need to include them to get a picture that is more consistent with what happens in real life. And we actually did that. I will show you our results. And another article we produced focused on cost-based pricing. So instead of starting from willingness to pay to the value-based price, we reconstruct a plausible price from the bottom up based on the methodology developed by Karine Oeil de Groot from the University of Rotterdam and Frederick Thielen. So they developed a methodology, a formula to evaluate those kind of cost-based pricing, what we should pay based on the R&D. We look at development cost, manufacturing, and I would say a reasonable profit margin for an orphan audit indication. And I will show you the main insight from both of those studies. So first of all,
before I forget, I think there are data up to 10 years after a signature in the literature. Just that I think when you present your thesis, it's important that you have those data that you can answer.
Okay.
So you should really check the long-term follow-up of those patients, because you will get the question, and if the answer is in the literature, this part of the answer you should know it.
Yes, thank you. So children like Pia now live long enough, to use the healthcare systems for reasons other than SMA, as mentioned, and this completely changes how we should think about long-term costs. So first insights from our study, I would say that life-saving treatments increase lifetime unrelated medical costs. So to put it bluntly, a child who lives longer will, of course, naturally consume more general health care across a longer lifespan. Then what we can say is that, the annual burden actually collapses. It's counterintuitive for now, but I will show you that what has been theorized as the red herring theory. Well, if you live longer, those kind of costs at the end of your life are rising, but if you live longer, they are collapsing. So near the end of life, healthcare costs rise sharply. This I will show you some information on that. And when survival is extended, the same spike is spending is simply pushed forward in time. Those therapies redistribute healthcare use. They don't create uncontrolled new spending. So survival changes basically when the money is spent, not how much must be spent each year. And as a fourth insight, I would say that by excluding those indirect medical costs from cost evaluation, we artificially make life-extending therapy look cheaper, and if we include them, we get a fairer, a more realistic picture. And I will show you what we have been able to gather as an information. Well, the concrete figures. So the indirect medical costs rise when survival increases. So with Zolgensma, basically. Under no treatment, the survival is short. SMA children without treatment, they live until 8 to 13 months in mean. So there are some costs basically because they go under respiratory, repeated hospitalization, and all that kind of cost near to death, unfortunately. Within 30 months, it's starting to cost. Then you have the case with Spinraza. We are reaching 57,000 euros. And then with the Zolgensma, so the cost is definitely higher. But as mentioned, you will see that the curve completely collapsed when we reported those costs in annual costs, sorry. So basically, the highest spending happens at the end of life. So when survival improves, the end of life peak is simply pushed forward, and it's not duplicated, it's not multiplied. So across the 5 years horizon that we choose to to use in our study. The Belgian data confirm exactly what the theory predicts. And we can see that longevity shift cost across time rather than creating new annual pressure. So this means that therapies like Spinraza and Zolgensma do not generate uncontrolled indirect medical costs. They restructure when in the life course these costs occur. And for a condition as rare as SMA, this redistribution matters far more than the absolute amounts.
At the same time, I mean, okay, it's because you count as in terms of life years, wherever, whomever benefits. So, and I'm, of course, if I were the parent of baby, yeah, of course, I would, no cost to society is too high.
Yeah.
For, at the same time, you could argue, okay, already cost society 3 million. And now you're telling me that because he will live quite long, then the fact that there will be a need will cost like everyone, bring more than everyone, but everyone. Then magically, well, per year is not so bad. Well, if my child dies next year, and there could have been a treatment that was not that expensive, but somehow didn't happen. Still, the fact that he or she is not there anymore, it also creates other costs for the parents. And so also, in a sense, one has to be careful because this is hugely expensive. Already by now, very soon, 20% of the budget in many countries go for rare diseases. Very tiny percent of population. Only 5% of the rare diseases have been taken care of. So what about, all these other less rare diseases that will be crowded out because we don't have money anymore? So one has to be careful about, because also, by the way, of course, the company, they love it. Huh? So of course, you know what this Zolgensma? Yeah, it's not so expensive after all, and we come, let's bring the millions. So you have to be careful. There is one by, what's his name again, Austrian friend, I3h, showing that, the big picture and how you compare across people. Because, as I say, I love the idea, and I think it's great if she's being treated. But, it depends on how you make the comparisons. So,
yeah, of course, but you're raising here a moral question, an ethical question. I mean, do we need to?
Well,
yeah.
My point is that this kind of reasoning is based on a specific ethical measure.
Yeah, definitely.
And say, if you can get 70 years of baby per year is not so much.
Yeah.
But versus extending life by 6 months for zillions of people, how do you compare? It's only a couple of months, so not so important.
And this is actually a good.
I'm trying to be a bit provocative here.
No, but the discussion is definitely.
I also have not the perspective. I only have a question. It depends on the answer to my first question. Once they get the Zolgensma, what's their quality like? Can they have a regular life? Can they work? Do they live with it? Because if they do, is it a yes?
Partial. We still don't know. We still don't know.
The thing.
The surviving, it's already a lot.
Mia goes to school and she's part of the scouts.
So is if she has a regular life in the long term, she's going to bring in revenues as well. If she works, like she has a wage, so she can be taxed, and this is not covered in the long term cost analysis.
Yeah, it's not monetized indeed, but we don't have. Yeah, sorry.
And also, I found it weird, but I don't know the methodology behind it. So we say, okay, if she survives, she has regular medical costs, just as everyone, but then that would be the baseline. We all have that cost, so why do we have to take that into account? Because if she wasn't sick, then she would cost that much. So why are we not taking these costs into account?
That's when the purpose is to evaluate the cost evaluation of a drug. You need to know if that drug brings new costs in the future to be more complete and more fair about the whole situation.
Yeah.
So otherwise you are underestimating the true cost of Zolgensma,
That's
basically.
the thing I'm not sure it's underestimating, because for me it's just going back to the base case where someone doesn't have the disease and get costs.
But still, we cannot avoid the fact that we just spent X million for that.
No, I think it's the fact that we add the fact that the more she lives, the more she's gonna cost, even if it's not.
But it's not a consensus yet. We do not include those costs yet in cost evaluation. But of course, the people with whom we worked are militating to include those costs to be more, I would say, okay.
But this is the decided them on. Okay.
Yeah. Shiri, you had a question, I think?
Yes. If you look on other cases of gene therapy that were made available by Zolgensma.
So if we looked at other gene therapy, that's your question.
Comparisons to the next.
That's very interesting. We should do that in the future, but it doesn't fall within the scope of what we have analyzed. But yeah, definitely, that would be the next step, I would say. Analyze other gene therapy to see if this is comparable, and yeah. Yeah, so I had another analysis ready about, the fair cost, the cost-based price of Spinraza this time, because it has been done for Zolgensma in the past by Frédéric Tillen-Weiner and De Groot. Just to summarize, because we are running out of time. Well, our analysis allowed us to calculate a realistic cost-based price of Spinraza, lying between 65 and 275,000 euros. And when we see the Belgian list price of Spinraza around the 10 years horizon, we can see that, there is a structural misalignment. So basically, through this analysis, we are, I would say, militating for a dual anchor, dual anchor pricing. So using a cost-based price, which we should pay as the floor, and as the ceiling, the value-based price, so what the society is willing to pay. You raised, Professor Doit-Ripon, the question of are we ready to pay for a child life, no matter how much it costs? So in between, there is definitely something we need to discuss, negotiate, but this dual anchor strategy can be the solution, maybe. So maybe the mapping reimbursement strategies for orphan drugs. So what we did there, we wanted to see how the countries decide whether to reimburse orphan drugs. So I think since we are running out of time, I will go quickly over. I mean, what do I do? I don't know. Because the repurposing is maybe the most important part. So yeah, we are about to submit this paper, so I invite you to read it when it will be accepted. But now what we will do is definitely go through a big part of my journey. We have been talking about a rare disease where, despite many barriers, treatments do exist. But for most rare disease, the situation is different. 9 out of 10 rare disease still not have any approved therapy. So the question changed fundamentally. When a field is scientifically complex, commercially unattractive, and fragmented across a very small population, how do we find alternatives? And in our research, we explore 2 complementary answers to that question. The first is drug repurposing, and the second is societal participation in orphan drug development. For each of these dimensions, we conducted a systematic review covering the regulatory, the clinical, and the policy literature. The systematic review on repurposing focuses on how existing drugs are redirected to rare disease indication. I will not go through the details of that review, but what I will do is definitely give you our descriptive analysis about repurposing, because what we did, we dedicated we built actually a large longitudinal data set of all FDA approvals from 1985 to 2024, tracking how already approved drugs have been repurposed to new therapeutic indication over time. And this allowed us to move from the theory we gathered from the literature review to data. So the first output of this work is this article that has been that is almost published in Nature Communication Medicine. When we look at the data, the first thing that jumps out is the success rates. Repurposed drugs succeeds 3 times more than new molecular entities. And the reason is quite simple. Their safety and PK/PD profiles are already known, so they are safe. We have tested them before. In other words, repurposing actually reduces the riskiest part of development. And this is why it has become so attractive for companies, especially, and we can see it in, I don't know if there is a laser, but after 2010. Well, what we can also say is that repurposing cuts the development time almost in half, 7 years on average versus 12 to 15 years for new drugs. So before we even look at volumes, we see the underlying mechanics repurposing is faster, safer, and strategically rewarded. What we can also see from our data is that biologics reshape the landscape. So the biologics are in orange in this figure. After 2010, we can see that BLAs surge and now represent almost half of all repurposed approvals. Well, there are some economic incentives that can explain the pike we can observe in that figure. I will not enter in the details, but for example, the PDUFA in 1992. You have also the breakthrough therapy designation, pediatric priority review vouchers, those kind of economic incentives that push innovation and in that case repurposing. Then what we can see is that we have mapped across therapeutic areas, and the pattern is extremely clear. We have 3 fields dominating in repurposing: oncology, we have neurology and cardiology. And what we can see between these fields is that they all have a platform effects mechanism that translate across disease, like inflammation, immunomodulation, metabolism. So these are pathways that can be redirected. So repurposing follows mechanistic logic, not randomness, like it was the case in the past. In the past, repurposing was serendipity. Now it's a true mechanism that are used by companies. What we can see here in the third figures I'm presenting, well, when we look at therapeutic movement, so when drugs travel when repurposed from a field to another, well, basically it's not really another field. Most drug remains in the same broad therapeutic area. So like you can see here, oncology to oncology, neurology to neurology in red. Well, it absorbs inflow from multiple fields because many mechanisms converge toward the same pathways shared by the area in question. Yeah.
Sanae, but this raises a question because you can call this repurposing, or you can say, okay, it's an extension of indication.
Yeah, but we have definitely defined this before we analyze our cases, and those are true repurposing cases. It means that we change the disease. We are within the same therapeutic area, but the disease is not the same. The biological mechanism underlying the disease is not the same. So we are not facing the same population. We are calling extension when we are facing the same biological pathway. But here it's completely different. So you have, yeah.
Sorry, I'm not to interrupt you.
No, please.
In the line of what Michelle was pointing at, my question was, how many of these repurposed drugs are recent drugs that, was still benefiting from exclusivity and then moved to different fields versus genuine, what we call, like prototype repurposing, adding drugs to treat something and then completely different. How many of these are just maybe salami tactics?
Yeah, but for that we don't have gathered all the information yet to assess this information. For now, we just observe. Okay, we have an indication, we have another indication, we are defining this as a repurposing case, but we didn't match this repurposing case with the patent information, the timeline, within which time window, etc. But this is definitely something we will do next from the data we have been able to gather. But the definition of repurposing was very strict here. That's why we can assume that those are true repurposing cases and not extension. Okay, so here the societal participation in the development of orphan drugs. That's another way to get drugs. Actually, to push for drugs from a societal way. But I don't think we have time for this. So can you tell me, Hilde, if we have time?
Yeah, we have 10 minutes and 2 questions already.
Okay, so maybe, but we have published an article about this way of pushing drugs in the pipeline. So I invite you to read it. Yeah, those are the insights, the typology we have extracted from our analysis. And as a last dimension, I would say, well, that now children live longer, and we wanted to assess how their quality of life is doing. And basically what we wanted to know precisely, and because I specialized in neurosciences, we wanted to know more about their cognition, because they can be they could work and produce money in the future. We wanted to know if their cognition was okay. And well, what we did is produce a literature review to see basically what has been said in the literature. And what we can say is that SMA does not erase cognition. It hides cognition because the communication is impaired, but the cognition is quite okay for those children, despite the type. But I will not enter into the details. And what we wanted to do next is actually, one of the key messages of our review is that we don't have, I would say, a universal tool to assess cognition in those children. And since they have a motor impairment, we wanted to test a tool that erase the motor dimension. And we developed with I3h and some psychological professional an eye tracking tool. So basically the children were answering cognitive test questionnaires with their eyes, and we were able to assess in a very preliminary study the cognition of those children, and understand what children with SMA can truly do when the motor effort is not longer the limited factor. And basically what our results show is that it reinforced the hypothesis that there is a normal cognition, definitely for type 2 and 3. I would say without confirming it, because we have insufficient power, but in the future we hope that we will reinforce this study. And as a last slide, I would say that throughout this talk, we had our journey from access, burden, new pathways to after treatment. And this journey is actually where all stakeholders meet. So regulators, payers, industry, academia, and with the patients at the center of this journey. And using SMA as a case study, we have shown that the key challenges are not only how innovation saves lives, but how it is governed, priced, evaluated once the patients survive. And the ultimate goal of my PhD was to provide, I would say, conclusion about SMA, and definitely to extract broader lessons and recommendations that extend to rare disease more widely. So I will go very quick on that one. Yeah. Or I wrap up?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I leave you with those recommendations. I'm sorry, it was very dense. Yeah.
Thank you, Sana. Thank you so much for presenting your work. And before closing, we have already 2 questions from Magdoum and Magdooms and Marc Malfait. In any case, before we leave you an answer, or let Magdooms and Marc Malfait ask their questions, I want to highlight that we will put the recordings of the seminar on our I3h website, together with the link to all the publications that have been published. And we will update them as soon as the ones that are now being or in review and being accepted, we will update this list as well. Thank you. Maybe Marc Dooms?
Yes, thank you very much, Akodad, for your very interesting data that we can use to discuss so-called value-based pricing. I have one addition. Europe is now working on an orphan device regulation. So until today, we have the United States and only Japan that have regulation on orphan devices. But in the near future, I guess next year, I'm part of many working parties, we will have also a European orphan device regulation. And my question is, there are in Belgium, as far as I know, 3 medicinal products for the treatment of SMA. You also have Evrysdi, which is risdiplam, and that's an oral medication.
Definitely.
Why
Yes,
don't you mention that?
Yeah, because actually, sorry, I mentioned it briefly, but indeed we are not included risdiplam in our study because when we started all those analyses, risdiplam was just launched, reimbursed in Belgium in 2022, and we didn't have back at that moment sufficient information to include risdiplam in our analysis on the effects, on the sustainability, long-term effects of risdiplam. So this is not something that we forgot. We are mentioning it in our studies, but we didn't have sufficient information at the moment of our analysis. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But it changed the game, risdiplam, yeah, indeed.
Thank you, Marc Malfait. You're on mute.
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much, Sanae, for this very comprehensive presentation. I was particularly interested by the Zolgensma case because I was involved in the reimbursement process as member of the Commission of Reimbursement of Medicines. And I have 2 comments. In the beginning, you mentioned that Article 111 was refused because Speranza was already. I think that my interpretation is that the MNP, the medical need program, was refused because indeed Speranza was already reimbursed and available. So maybe good to check because Article 111 is a totally different purpose. It is to negotiate at the end of the process, of the reimbursement process, about concerning the uncertainties, clinical uncertainties or budgetary uncertainties, and this is at the end of the process.
Yes.
And
sorry.
Yeah, do you want to?
Yeah, but from what we read back then is that there was a clinician attempt to get access to that article to speed up things and finally get access, but it failed here again because of Spinraza being a reimbursed alternative in the picture.
For the MNP, that's correct, but not for the final reimbursement. It was not an obstacle, an hurdle to have the reimbursement. Okay. The discussion was more about indeed the Spinraza was a comparator, mm-hmm. And then all the negotiation for the final price, the net price, and this was my secondary comments, is that 1.9 million it is not correct to say that the cost of Zolgensma is 1.9 million, because during this negotiation, and it was also true of the Benelux I, and you mentioned it, it's correct, there was a discussion about the value, the net value of the Zolgensma. And so this was discussed indeed with Ireland and Netherlands, that's correct. And at the end, there was the I3h was also taken into account to see comparative to Spinraza, and you explain indeed that Spinraza is a chronic treatment, while Zolgensma is only a one-shot treatment. But at the end, so the net cost is certainly not 1.9 million. Of course, you are not aware about this net cost because it is a confidential discussion. The rebate is confidential, but you can have some idea because it's published in the Morse report of Inamirisif. Each year, they publish the average discount for, okay, it's an average, but what we'll see, it is more and more increasing. And in the last years, it's about 60% refund.
Yeah, we are well aware of that. It's around 700 euros, the number circulating. 700,000 euros, sorry. And this is definitely a proxy, we don't know, and we are actually mentioning this opacity, which is a pity within all those negotiations through Beneluxa. And we know that 1.9 is only the market listed price. And that the negotiated price is lower than that, of course. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, both Marks, for the questions raised. Thank you so much, Sana, for presenting your work. We look forward to your, first private defense, and then for sure we will introduce or invite you all to the public defense of Sana in the coming year. This was our last reading seminar for this year. I wish all of you, thank you for being with us, and we wish you all a very warm end of the season. Thank you so much, and see you next year.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, everyone.
Bye.